Does this verdict sort of decisively mark the end of Hasina's political career?
Even before the verdict, Sheikh Hasina's political career had more or less ended.
What exactly do we want out of this entire situation?
For India, the prime consideration is right now to continue dialogue. Because if dialogue breaks down, then there will be difficulties not just for people in power, but for the common people of Bangladesh and India.
Hello and welcome to In Focus. I'm G. Sampath. The International Crimes Tribunal of Bangladesh has handed a death sentence to former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina. The tribunal found her guilty of crimes against humanity. It convicted her of ordering the killing of anti-government protesters between June and August 2024. Sheikh Hasina fled to Delhi last year when her government fell. She has lived in exile ever since. But now she is a wanted criminal in Bangladesh. The Bangladesh government wants India to extradite her. Will India agree to do so? And does this mark the end of Hasina's political career? With national elections due in February, what does this tribunal verdict mean for domestic politics in Bangladesh? And what does it mean for the future of the Awami League, the party Hasina has led so far? We speak with Kallol Bhattacherjee from the Hindu's Delhi Bureau. Kallol, welcome to In Focus. Thank you so much for joining us once again. So I want to start by asking you about the International Crimes Tribunal, which has handed out this death sentence to Sheikh Hasina. There have been questions raised about how independent this trial is, this tribunal is. So Awami League spokespersons have said, and Sheikh Hasina herself has also said it's a politically motivated trial and it's a rigged trial. That's what she has called it. And many people are also, wondering if this verdict, to what extent it would be considered as a fair one, And she has said that, she never meant to have all those protesters killed. It was something which happened when the situation got out of control. So how do we look at these kinds of statements vis-a-vis the manner in which the tribunal went about it? People have also said it was a very hastily held trial and so on and so forth.
You see, there is a history to the International Crimes Tribunal to begin with. The ICT is basically based on the ICT Act of 1973 that was enacted by Sheikh Mujibur Rahman's government that came to power in 1972 after the Liberation War. And like now, even back then, justice was one of the major planks, major demands of that time. And the justice that Sheikh Mujib's government at that time had in mind was the justice for the victims of the genocide that was perpetrated by the Pakistan military forces, the leaders, and the masterminds, of course, based in Pakistan. What happened subsequently was that after, of course, there was an upheaval even in Mujib's time, and Mujib himself was assassinated, as we all remember, in August 1975, and subsequently even some of the biggest leaders like Mr. Tajuddin Ahmed and others, they were assassinated in November 1975. So what happens next is that this whole idea of justice for the victims of 1971 got diluted. And then we had a decade-long military rule by General Ershad, and before General Ershad we had the nearly 4 years long military rule by Captain Zia. Now what happens in this particular period is that other factors take in spots of priority, and Bangladesh deals with those issues like development, etc. Now, when Sheikh Hasina returns to power in 1996 with her Awami League returning to power for the first time after Sheikh Mujib's assassination, that idea again takes some shape. And finally, when she returns to power for her second term in 2009, the idea of the ICT under her government again takes root. So in 2009 and 2010 and 2011, again, the ICT is revived by her, and it proceeds to punish those people who were complicit in the genocide of 1971. And following the verdicts of the ICT during that time from 2013 to 2016, a number of Jamaat leaders who were complicit in the crimes against humanity in the 1971 war and the whole repression of that time they were given death sentence. And almost, I think, 9 or 10 of them, or perhaps a little more than that, all of them were hanged. Barring one, that's the leader, the founder of Jamaat-e-Islami Bangladesh, the Ghulam Azam, who was in his early 90s, and he was hospitalized, and he was given a sentence of, I think, 90 years. 90 years jail term, but then he fell sick and he passed away in a hospital in Dhaka. So I'm giving you this background to explain that that the ICT, when Sheikh Hasina revived it, was also revived as a political platform, or rather a platform or an outfit that had to deliver a political promise that she had made to the people of Bangladesh. So therefore, the ICT today, just to answer your question, is basically as free as the ICT was back in 2010 and 2011. Because back then, it had to deliver a political promise. And now, as much as back then, just like Professor Muhammad Yunus has promised to deliver justice, just like in case of Hasina as well as in case of Sheikh Mujib. This time, of course, Professor Yunus is saying that he is going to deliver justice for the killings of 2024. So in this particular context also, it's a political vehicle. So its independence or whatever scope that it has is basically defined by the political context of the time.
So that means there wasn't any chance that, whoever is brought to trial would be found not guilty and acquitted, because then you have a political goal to be delivered.
Well, the IGP, the former IGP, who is the third accused in this particular trial that took place, the verdict that came out day before yesterday, he has been dealt with gently.
He turned state witness.
He turned into a state witness, but therefore he has been given 5 years jail term. So again, this, as I was saying, this is basically defined. It's whatever scope it has is defined by the political agenda of the ruling government. So ICT is basically defining its scope in terms of crimes that would be defined or regarded as of heinous nature, a heinous category under the international law. So that is, in that sense, they are calling it the International Crimes Tribunal. It does not, however, make it a truly international criminal court like we have in The Hague, and that is a different kind of a court.
Why do you need this reference to international law? Doesn't Bangladesh have a domestic law which says, which basically prohibits crimes against humanity? You could call it a National Crimes Tribunal. Is it to give it a greater legitimacy, etc., or is it because of its provenance in the 1971-72 events?
Yeah.
Is that the reason?
Yeah, exactly. Because what happened in 1971 was that the people who committed the genocide of 1971, that is the Pakistani establishment figures, they committed the crimes and then they fled the scene. So what happens here is that there is this huge upsurge and demand among the people of Bangladesh that to bring those people back from, say, in Pakistan or in other capitals in the world, because in case of Pakistan, some of these figures were actually sent abroad as Pakistani embassy employees or sometimes even in Pakistani envoys. And remember, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto himself remained the chief of government in Pakistan. So he was also not beyond that scope of justice that Bangladeshi citizens were looking for. So in that particular sense, they had to define justice in terms, or rather the crimes committed in Bangladesh during 1971 in terms of quote-unquote international magnitude crimes. So therefore, it's basically the origin of this particular tribunal has itself, defined in terms of what is internationally recognizable crimes.
Right. So apparently, if Sheikh Hasina wants to appeal this verdict, she has to go to Bangladesh. She can't do it from exile. So do you see any possibility of her fighting this legally, either by going to Bangladesh and joining a party there, or politically, by staying here in India and maybe taking it to the court of, what politicians like to say, the court of public opinion in Bangladesh? Is there any chance of either of this happening, or does this verdict sort of decisively mark the end of Hasina's political career?
Well, I think even before the verdict, Sheikh Hasina's political career had more or less ended. Let's face the fact that very rarely in world history, a prime minister with absolute power or a leader of a country with the kind of power that Sheikh Hasina wielded till August say August 4 or 5, 2024, can actually stage a return after the kind of massive breakdown in law and order. Because, it is, after all, not just the loss of lives that we witnessed in July, August 2024, but also the breakdown of the entire government machinery, the destruction of public property, and then consequently the kind of blowback that the law and order officials who were also equally at the receiving end of this particular kind of violence that came as a blowback from the protesters. Because when Sheikh Hasina left, these law and order officials had to bear the brunt, because many of them were then killed, and many of them were killed very brutally. There were dead bodies hanging on the streets of Dhaka. We have seen those visuals. And therefore, I think Sheikh Hasina's political career, it would require a miracle if it had to be resurrected in the short term, say, even by the election of 2026. Because I don't think she can stage a return to politics in the short term. But having said that, I would always say that, ultimately it's the people who decide the fate of a particular leader. We remember what happened to Indira Gandhi. She was absolutely unpopular in 1977, January and February, when she lost that election. And then, of course, she also did a lot of things in the meanwhile. She took advantage of every political opportunity that came her way. She did not leave the country, number one. And therefore, she grabbed opportunities that came her way. And in comparison, Sheikh Hasina is in exile, number one. And secondly, she is not yet recognizing, or she hasn't yet come to terms with the magnitude of the crisis that was in front of her in July, August 2024, and subsequently that followed. So I would say that her career is over for the time being, but the political tradition that her party represents or represented, the whole idea of Awam, that is the Awami concerns, the public concerns. And remember, there is a great deal of difference between Sheikh Hasina 2024-25 and Sheikh Hasina of 1981 and 1991. I would remind you that, when in 1991 the great cyclone took place in Bangladesh and the whole world was just coming to terms with the magnitude of that cyclone, Sheikh Hasina was the first one to go to the cyclone spot, and she was photographed in that, the horrible condition where dead bodies are floating. And Sheikh Hasina was there even before the government of Khaleda Zia had sent her representatives, and she was there. She was the first responder in crisis. Similarly, in 1981, Sheikh Hasina did not care for her personal safety, and she returned to Dhaka, ending 6 years of exile. I think over the years, Sheikh Hasina became more conservative. She had a brilliant beginning. She fought against General Ershad and toppled that government, joining hands with Khaleda Zia. And then she became conservative. And when she became ultimately conservative, I think 2014 is really the beginning of a very, very different sort of Sheikh Hasina. And therefore, the downfall has been really profound and very tragic, I would say. I don't see her staging a comeback, but then the tradition of politics, it will find a window of opportunity if things in Bangladesh remain unchanged. That again depends on the way the domestic scenario unfolds in the coming months, and a lot of other factors. That's what I feel right now.
We will come back to the domestic scenario and the future of the Awami League in a bit. But before that, I wanted to ask you about Sheikh Hasina's immediate future. There is this demand for extradition from Bangladesh. Bangladeshi government has also said that, continuing to let her stay here in India when she is a wanted criminal in Bangladesh would be seen as an affront to justice, and it will be seen as unfriendly. And India is weighing its options. The MEA has said that we are taking into account the interests of all stakeholders, etc. This is diplomatic speak. What does it really mean? What would be India's calculations when taking a decision on whether or not to accede to your neighbor's request that you have an extradition treaty? We know that there are certain provisions and exceptions to that treaty wherein India can say no, this doesn't probably apply to Sheikh Hasina, etc. But what exactly do we want out of this entire situation? If we agree, what do we get? If we don't agree, what are the costs? Because clearly it will be seen as an affront to justice.
Well, I think India understands Bangladesh very well. And India also understands, I'm talking about the Indian establishment. Indian establishment also understands that Sheikh Hasina as a figure, as a political figure, gives the current dominant stakeholders in Dhaka the opportunity to close ranks. The opportunity to remove some of the political rifts that have emerged among them in Dhaka over the last 16 months or 15 months. What has been happening in Dhaka is that while they are obviously united in their opposition to Sheikh Hasina's return to Bangladesh politics, but there are also very obvious fissures that have emerged among all these prominent stakeholders. So I think India's...
Which are the prominent stakeholders you're referring to? Referring to Jamaat-e-Islami, BNP?
Of course, Jamaat-e-Islami, BNP and the student advisors.
Where does Muhammad Yunus figure in all of this?
Muhammad Yunus is the kind of the high priest. He is the leader of the entire interim administration, and he's also the consensus builder among all these groups, which are also competing for power. Because
what does he want really? When he's not held elections for the longest time, now there's going to be elections. Once the elections are held, will he quietly exit the political scene? What exactly?
Well, again, there is a very interesting document that has come up in Bangladesh in the last few months, and it came on the 5th of August. It's called the July Charter. Now, the July Charter is, I think, 27 to 28 pages long, list of deliverables. Now, this is essentially aimed at changing the structure of the Bangladesh state. Now, in that particular July Charter, there is a section on the power of the Bangladesh president. The Bangladesh president was very much a kind of a titular figurehead. But the July Charter aims to make Bangladesh president considerably more powerful than he or she was before 2024, and the December 2025. So it looks like that, this is my assessment, of course, that Professor Muhammad Yunus would be the prime candidate to be the president of Bangladesh after the February 2026 election. So I don't think Professor Muhammad Yunus is going away. I think there will be a demand from the prominent stakeholders that since Professor Muhammad Yunus has already steered the country or the government at a very critical juncture in the country's history over the last 2 years, so therefore he is the best person so that this whole transition from this interim government election and then on to the next democratically elected government is steered by someone like him. And obviously, after the election is held and after the next government is elected and it takes charge, there would be the requirement for filling up the post of the president of Bangladesh. And I think that is where Muhammad Yunus will have his second innings waiting for him.
Right. I interrupted you when you were talking about India's considerations vis-a-vis extradition.
Right, of course. Well, as I said, India understands Bangladesh very well, and it knows that Sheikh Hasina gives all these prominent stakeholders an opportunity to unite. But they are also competing among themselves. And India, of course, wants that competition to intensify. Because everyone understands Sheikh Hasina doesn't have a political future. So India in this particular context would rather give, because the best message that India can deliver is not just to Bangladesh. The message that India needs to deliver as a state, I'm talking about theoretically speaking, as a state, India needs to deliver that message to its friends across South Asia and beyond, that in times of crisis, India, the state of India, will not abandon them. So it's not a message just for Sheikh Hasina or Bangladesh. It is a message for India's friends in Myanmar. It's a message for India's friends in Nepal. It's a message for India's friends in Afghanistan. And we remember what happened to Muhammad Najibullah in 1996 September when he was brutally killed by the Mujahideen.
Who exactly do you mean by India's friends in the Myanmar dictatorship?
Well, there are lots of friends that a state like India, basically nurtures across the world. And India, of course, has many supporters and friends who are political stakeholders in different countries. So if you look at, say, the Nepal political system or the Maldivian political system, we have in these political systems pro-India figures or pro-India voices. And obviously, if somebody is pro-India in, say, Mauritius, if somebody is pro-India, even all the way back in say, the Caribbean islands, and if he or she gets into some sort of trouble, and if they seek help from India, and if India refuses to extend that help, then perhaps India as a state will really not have much credibility.
I see this point of view, but some might ask, given the moral leadership that is expected from a country like India, to what extent would India go to protect its friends when a particular friend is accused by their own kind of genocide or crimes against humanity. So would that be a consideration at all, or would that not be such a big consideration?
Well, I think, we all are seeing a real genocide happening as we speak right now in the world. So we also know that what happened in Bangladesh was a very big, violent phase. And it was a phase of, massive killings and law and order crackdown, breakdown in the state and stability. But I don't think India as a state would surrender that easily, because Sheikh Hasina particularly is not just another political leader from just another political system. She's one of the tallest South Asian figures that who has survived. I think she had a remarkable political career, both as a fighter, as a survivor. She returned as a fighter in 1981 to Bangladesh's politics. She toppled the dictatorship of Hussein Mohammad Ershad, then went on to become the Prime Minister, was quite popular, and had a resounding victory in 2009 election. It is another matter that she actually became unpopular because of her actions and fraudulent elections subsequently. That's a dark part.
Right. I get that. So, assuming that she continues to stay in India and India does not extradite her to Bangladesh, what happens then between India and Bangladesh, India-Bangladesh relations? Because there is also the China factor here. We know that there are lots of economic activity, which is sort of getting an uptick between Bangladesh and China also. So in that dynamic, is that something we are going to be thinking about as well? Because if you don't do this and you have an unfriendly regime, so to speak, would that really affect us, or that's not such a big consideration?
Well, it is a very big consideration right now. It is a very big factor right now. But let us also not forget that India-Bangladesh relation is a very broad spectrum relation, from sharing of river water to flood data to electricity to food grains to agriculture products, from onions to whatever you name it, fabric and textile. Everything is connected between India and Bangladesh. So I think for India, the prime consideration is right now to continue dialogue. Because if dialogue breaks down, then there will be difficulties, not just for people in power, but for the common people of Bangladesh and India, mostly for Bangladesh. And that, I think, is the main consideration for India, that irrespective of the irritation or the irritants that is being generated by the presence of a big political leader who is wanted in her country on Indian soil right now, it is a issue that India will have to deal with through perhaps meetings where they will meet with their Bangladeshi counterparts and Bangladeshi stakeholders, where they will meet to disagree. But even those sort of meetings will have to be held, because, not all meetings lead to agreements. And India-Bangladesh relation, considering it's a very wide spectrum relation, it will have to sit down. They have to sit down with each other, and they have to, continue with this, with their relation, despite all the irritants that are present right now.
We have the elections coming up early next year. So what does this mean for the future of the Awami League, the party Hasina has led for decades now? Because without her being in the picture, will there be someone else leading the party to the elections, or will the Awami League boycott the election altogether, sit it out, maybe come back later in the next elections? What is this? Where does this leave A, the Awami League, and B, the other players in the political scene, the Jamaat and the BNP? Like, who's going to be the front runner? What does it mean, given the parliamentary elections that are around the corner?
Well, in Bangladesh, elections are basically defined in terms of transparency and inclusion. And the current government, that is the interim government, is defining the next election as an inclusive government. And they're defining it in terms that the people who were excluded in previous elections are going to be included in the next election. But the ones who dominated in the previous elections will be obviously excluded in the next election. And by that, they mean that Awami League has no chance of contesting the 2026 February election. So what's going to happen is that they are going to go into an election where there is going to be, very, very strong...
The Awami League will not be allowed to contest?
Yes, they will not be allowed to contest. And that has been repeated by both by Professor Yunus as well as his other political advisors, who have made it very clear that since they have not come to the ICT, and therefore they have not faced justice, and that is the reason that they remain fugitive, they remain wanted, and that is why they will not be allowed to come back and again contest elections under, of course, Awami League. So what we are looking at the next election is that it is going to be a contest for power among the people who were opposed to Awami League. So then here comes the next chapter of the Bangladesh story, that you have the people who were united in their opposition to Sheikh Hasina and her politics 1.5 years ago are going to fight with each other to prove who is better in the game of power. So again, all these forces like, BNP, Jamaat, the student activists and Jatiyo Party and several others, of course, they are all now going to turn against each other because it's a political campaign that they will have to fight. And here is the real catch, because the July Charter, which is obviously aimed at restructuring the state of Bangladesh, is coming up. And one section of the people, one section of the political parties and political stakeholders are saying that the election should be held after the July Charter has been placed for a public referendum. So the referendum would demand that this July Charter should be implemented and the election should be held under the factors or under the rules that are in the July Charter. On the other hand, people like BNP leaders, especially Bangladesh Nationalist Party and its leadership, who are comfortable in the prime ministerial system of government, they are quite clearly uncomfortable with this idea that there will be a president who is going to be a little more powerful than the Prime Minister of Bangladesh, because in their bargain, they would not like to be less powerful if they come to form the government. So here again there is a very tense confrontation happening between BNP and Jamaat and others, because Jamaat obviously favors a more powerful president. It also favors the charter should be implemented before the election. But BNP doesn't want the charter to be implemented before the election. So these factors are also creating a lot of noise within these political stakeholders. So my point is that even though they will manage to keep Sheikh Hasina and Awami League out of politics for the next election, will their contest be friendly enough for a smooth transfer of power from the interim government to a democratically elected government? Because there lies a lot of doubt. And I don't think is going to be easy, because the arguments and already the accusations and counter accusations that are coming from BNP as well as from Jamaat are quite intimidating. Like yesterday, the Jamaat had a big meeting, but then the BNP has been quite clear that they want quite prime minister centric government, which they want should come after the election in February 2026. But if the charter is implemented, if the charter is also thrown for a referendum on the day of the election, which is something that BNP is willing to tolerate, then the whole structure can become quite unstable. So in that case, even the election may not lead to a stable government. It may.
So if the election is held on the same day as the referendum, let us say, and if a particular party, let's say the BNP,
wins the parliamentary election,
yeah, and the charter gets adopted,
yeah,
then its prime minister would be less powerful than the president.
Exactly.
And who would be the president?
Obviously. So you see, and also the charter, in fact, Professor Yunus delivered a speech.
How would the president be chosen? Was it like...
It would be chosen through secret ballot by both the houses of the parliament.
Okay.
So Professor Yunus delivered a speech just a few days back, and in that he very categorically laid out that the interim government can actually pave the way for the next democratically elected government in February 2026. But then the elected government would be under watch for 180 days, because there would be a 180 days period in which the next government would have to implement certain some certain goals and ambitions of the interim government. So to say that the interim government will exhaust its mandate with the election of the next government is also a bit of a stretch, because the interim government is also saying that though it may go away, but its agenda would actually keep rolling. So there are these many...
So who will keep watch over the newly elected government?
So there again comes the question that, if the charter is thrown for referendum on the day of the election, then the charter's implementation would require some sort of a commission, because they already have a commission called Consensus Commission. It's called, Unity Commission or Consensus Commission. So this sort of a commission or this sort of a special vehicle would then be formed to keep watch on the government, whether the government is following the agreements that were reached by multiple parties in the month of August.
That doesn't make any political sense, right? In a democracy, the people's mandate is sovereign. So you have an elected government which is reporting it to an unelected body. How is that?
Again, it is all because the present interim government has defined its legitimacy in terms of what is public. So, while defining its legitimacy, it has said that it has drawn its legitimacy from the idea of a public uprising. So, if when in my conversation with them, I've often heard that that they have actually derived their legitimacy from the public, though they did not get elected, but it was very clear that the people chose them through an uprising. So if they define their scope and their existence in that particular, quote unquote, public way, then they would also contest the, as you said, the public, mandate for the next government in that manner. So therefore, there is a lot of, give and take, a lot of,
I'm so confused. Sorry.
True. Yeah, it is.
It's quite confusing. So you have an elected government, which is elected by the public, which is quite transparent. We know how many people voted for which party, and this party has won, elected by the public. How is this public inferior in status to the public, which gives legitimacy to an unelected commission which will oversee this elected body, elected government?
I'm of course saying that they would require some sort of an outfit to keep watch on them, because if the charter is also put through referendum, and if it is accepted, because there would be yes or no kind of a verdict that the referendum would have to give. So if it is a yes vote for the charter, then they would require some sort of an overseeing body to ensure that the charter is implemented, or its agenda is implemented over the next 180 days or whatever days that they come up with. But I would say that right now everything is up in the air. It's a kind of classic state formation stage, where everybody feels very competent and very confident that they have access to power. The fact is that the definities, what can I say? The whole certainty of a state mechanism is missing. A modern state makes life predictable. A modern state makes life, more orderly. But in Bangladesh, right now, the state organs are existing, but then they are not able to provide orderly outcomes. And the political contest that is breaking out, whether, including or excluding Sheikh Hasina, it is not a very, very orderly transition that we have in our, site right now. So it's quite a chaotic several months that we are expecting ahead. And even if the election is held in 2026, even before that, there is a doubt about this particular, as we said, the charter, the July proclamation. At the same time, there is also a demand to change the modus, the mode of the election itself.
Sorry, this is another...
Again, the Jamaat is demanding that it should be a proportional representation system.
Okay.
Because they are saying that typical, election of Bangladesh is not really, convenient, or it doesn't provide a level playing field.
Proportionate representation as opposed to a first past the post.
Yeah.
That seems like a fair demand given what's happening in India. We want...
yeah, but that's, the Bihar election, of course, was a case in point. But then, in case of Jamaat, which obviously is not a very, very strong force in Bangladesh, because Bangladesh has had the history of these, BNP versus Awami League. Jamaat was the fifth or sixth powerful party. But in this particular context, because Jamaat has a very strong street force, it has got a very strong cadre, it has got a very strong student outfit called Shibir and others, and they are actually out in the open right now. Unlike in Sheikh Hasina's period, when they are under pressure, many of their leaders were, as I said, that they were executed.
So who doesn't want proportional representation in Bangladesh?
The big parties, the BNP and others, they would feel uncomfortable, because big parties and the parties which are close to the state, say the Jatiyo Party, the BNP, and parties of that kind, even some of the left-leaning parties that were part of the coalition politics, who were comfortable part of, say,
Speaking of big parties, Kallol, I just wanted to ask you something which I forgot to ask you earlier. Awami League, it has been a big party. It had a fat vote base. How much of it is legit? We don't know now, but it does have a strong base. It's been there for a long time. Now, all those voters who were voting for the Awami League, their legitimate support base, what happens to them in the February elections? Who are they going to go for? Because their first choice is no longer on the scene, and they presumably are still Awami League supporters. So, is that a sizable number? And if yes, who are they? Which way are they going to go? Do we know anything about that?
Well, when a strong leader leaves the scene, there is naturally a lot of uncertainty and anarchical situation that we all saw in Bangladesh. And naturally, there is a very strong demand or a very strong urge from the people to have that sort of, orderly time that they had earlier. And I think people of Bangladesh right now, there is a section, and of course, people in Bangladesh who want a strong leader to come back. And some people, of course, in a sort of, a moment of frustration, I have heard that, we need someone like Hasina to be back in power. But then, once the games change, they change forever. And that is what has happened in case of Bangladesh. And Sheikh Hasina is, of course, a matter of a figure of past. What is happening, however, as I said at the beginning, that Sheikh Hasina may actually vanish in the clouds of past, but then her party and the tradition that Awami League represents will stay current. And also, let us remember that Sheikh family is not just Hasina and her son and her daughter. There are also other members of the Sheikh family, including her cousins. They are also a very big family. And though, of course, a big part of her family was assassinated, as we all remember, in August 1975. But then the Sheikh family is a very powerful family in Bangladesh's politics. And they can't be just dismissed, because that is also the other political reality. And that is why we see that all these areas like, Gopalganj and, Madaripur, these areas where there was so much violence from 10th of November onwards, because there they gave the call for a complete lockdown, anticipating that Sheikh Hasina is going to get death sentence. So these parts of Bangladesh will also in near future, perhaps also in distant future, remain very strong grounds, strongholds of Awami League, because Awami League as a political force will not vanish because Sheikh Hasina is being removed from the scene, because everyone remembers Sheikh Mujib, and that Awami League was the party that fought for the independence of Bangladesh from Pakistan. So therefore, these factors will not vanish. People will not forget those factors. So therefore, Awami League will, of course, be there, and Awami League supporters will also have to decide whether they would participate in the elections. Of course, Sheikh Hasina said in the interview that she, of course, it's a written interview to The Hindu, and in that she said that she did not order her supporters to boycott the polls. She said that she expected her supporters not to go to the polling stations if her candidates are not placed there. So I think it will be a choice that the Awami League supporters would have to make on the day of election, because as a society, when they see that others are going and voting, they would also have to make that decision whether they should join the election and go for somebody who is relatively close to the Awami tradition. And I think, there is a possibility that many of them would vote for either a kind of an establishment party like the BNP, because that is one party where they would feel somehow comfortable, because BNP is part of the establishment legacy, just like Awami League represents the establishment legacy of Bangladesh. They would not like to go with Jamaat, because Jamaat is entirely different. Though there are some whispers also that there are some sections in Awami League who believe that if at all we have to survive in today's Bangladesh, then we have to go with Jamaat, because Jamaat is going to dictate the terms in near future. So that's a choice that Awami League's voters would have to make. So what I'm saying is that Sheikh Hasina's importance is diminishing because she's in exile, but her politics and the politics of Awami League will remain on part of Bangladesh's political landscape, and the supporters of Awami League would also remain part of Bangladesh's political landscape, and it is they who have to make that choice. Would they like to mobilize themselves sometime in future and sort of pose a challenge to whoever is in power in future in Bangladesh, and again, whatever political scene they create.
Right, it's a totally uncertain political scene.
Which is unfolding right in the heart of South Asia.
Right, and I think there will be some kind of a milestone moment when the elections take place, but for now it remains quite confusing and uncertain. Nonetheless, thank you so much, Kallol, for joining us. Pleasure talking to you.
Thank you so much, Sampath. Pleasure.